Hello there, friends and sane persons, and welcome to another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. It's the 13th today, so I get to wear my 13 hat. I sometimes wear it when it's not the 13th, but it's nice when I do it on the right day. Anyway, Wednesday Whimsy is a short show that I do every Wednesday evening where I talk about a board game, a top 10, a board game related topic, or something else that happens to be on my mind. Recently, I talked about a very long space themed game called Voidfall, and I decided it would be fun to make a list of my top 10 long games. Now, long obviously is a subjective experience. Something can feel long to one person, something can be long to another person. And things can feel shorter than they are, they can feel longer than they are. There's a lot of variation there, but these are 10 games that I know if I play them, they're going to go for a long time. They're going to go for, uh, you know, more than an hour, in many cases, more than two. Sometimes, it might get into the 3 hour mark. And that for me is very long. Yeah, obviously, there are longer games than this is not the top 10 longest games. It is my top 10 favorite games that I know are going to be long. So with that out of the way, let's uh, let's jump right in with my number 10. So my number 10 is a game. The reason it's my number 10, it's one of the longer games on the list, actually. But the reason it's my number 10 is because I don't get to play it very often. And part of that is the length. I can kind of show what it is. The game is called Here I Stand, and it is a fantastic game about the wars of Reformation with Martin Luther. It is just a really good game. Um, you're going to be taking the role of either the Catholic Church, the Protestant movement, the British monarchy, the French monarchy, the Austrian Empire, and I think it's the Ottoman Empire. That's right. And you're going at each other. And you'll notice that I had said six different factions there. It looks like this game is said to take 180 to 360 minutes, and that's honestly fairly accurate. Plus an extra hour to set up, and that's if everybody knows the rules. Because this is a game for six people. It's for exactly six people. It's really not doesn't work at different player counts, and it's a very in-depth political game, kind of Twilight Struggle like. It's like six-player Twilight Struggle actually. Uh, but just because of it requires kind of the perfect storm to be able to play it. But it is I know if I'm ever going to play this one, I have to hand pick the other five people, make sure that they know what they're doing, and set it up and plan on playing it all day. And that's why I rarely get to play it anymore, which is unfortunate because it's a pretty good game. It holds up pretty well. Anyway, that is my number 10 long game. Here I stand. My number 9 game comes up next. My number 9 game is not nearly as long, but it is a fairly substantial commitment. This is a game, is a space-themed game. Many long games are space-themed, although not all of them clearly on my list are. This game is called Eclipse. Now, there's the New Dawn for the Galaxy version, and then there's the old original one. Honestly, they're not that different. I know that's probably heresy, but the game experiences are very similar. In Eclipse, it is a deep space Euro game. And you are running a galactic economy, and you're trying to place these cubes out on the board to uncover your income and manage your resources, and go out, and occasionally you'll see it takes up a lot of space. It can be played by up to 9 players, at least the first version could. You're just managing this galactic empire, and you're trying to make it through the end of the game with the most points. There's a lot of ways you can get points. You can develop your technology. You can attack and win points that way. There's this random element of drawing these tokens from a bag. There are, you can just get points by conquering different areas of the galaxy. There's a lot of ways to do it, and it's a fascinating experience here. I love the way everything works together. This game is it's a long game. Now the statistics here suggest 60 to 180 minutes, and it's definitely going to be closer to the 180 than the 60. So that's that for me is going to be a long game, and so that is my number 9, Eclipse, either version. Let's go to my number 8. So my number 8, I'm going to put up the version that's available. It's there's two versions of this game, and the one I have played less, but the one that you can actually buy these days is called Unfathomable. So Unfathomable is a game of intrigue in a Lovecraftian world. You're on a ship, and some people have heard the call of the deep ones and are trying to sink this ship before it reaches its destination, while others are trying to work together to find the traitors and make it to the end. And it's a game that just really requires a lot of time. It says 120 to 240 minutes. Again, that's going to be pretty close to it. It's going to be on the longer side, especially with more players. There's just a lot of things going on, a lot of steps, a lot of phases, a lot of time when you have to think about things, because what you do, not only will it affect the game, it might affect how people perceive you, and that might affect whether you are treated as a friendly player or an unfriendly player. The game has one of my favorite board game moments in it. This time when I was the trader and took everyone to Deep One City, and was just trying to pass it off as, it was the best I could do under the circumstances. The other game that it is based on is called Battlestar Galactica. It's just that version is really going to be hard to find these days. So I'm putting it down as Unfathomable. But if you like one, you'll like the other. They're essentially the same. Anyway, there you go. That's my number 8, Unfathomable. Let's move on now to my number 7. My number 7 is one that I have talked about a lot. It comes up a lot. I tried not to do campaign games on this list, but and this one kind of is a campaign game, but it's sort of one session campaigns, I guess. Anyway, the game is called Sleeping Gods. Sleeping Gods is a story. It's more story than game. You will see this. It says 60 to 1,200 minutes. That's long. I usually find that you can play through the game from start to finish in about 6 hours. So, you really have to understand that is what you're getting into. It is, I don't know how anyone could play it at 60 minutes unless you just lost. So it is, almost a solo experience, although it works well with two or three others as well. Um, but you're going through this world, you're having this story experience, and the story and theme are really deep, and it's a great experience. But you do have to know getting into it, it is not going to be something that you just sort of set up, play for an hour, and then go on your way. Now the rules suggest that that's what you should do, but that's treat it like reading a book. But that's not the way to play this. You really should set it up when you have enough time, experience the full story so you don't forget anything. And there's a new version of it. There's Sleeping Gods, Distant Skies, which I actually like a tiny bit better. It is, however, a tiny bit shorter. So that is why Sleeping Gods is the one that makes it on my list. That's my number 7. Let's go on to number 6. So my number 6 is a game that, just like Sleeping Gods, is it's a lot of reading. This game, oddly enough, it's called My Father's Work. Excuse me. Oddly enough, the timing, it doesn't even give you a range. It says 180 minutes, and that's about right. It is a good 3 hours to play through this. What you're doing is you have inherited your father's notes and equipment and manor house, and you are trying to build it up and develop it while finding out what your father was working on and developing it for yourself. It's usually, building a monster, think Dr. Frankenstein type of a game, if you couldn't tell from that picture. The story itself is fascinating. There's so much to explore, and there's three different scenarios, and they all really go different ways. And if you play the same scenario more than once, it's going to be different because it's just kind of programmed that way so that you're going to have a different experience every time. And the story is fantastic, but there is a lot. And it's advertised as having voice, sort of reading and voice acting. That's only on about a third of the stories, maybe. And so, you really have to know going into it, it's going to be quite the long experience, but it's a good experience, much like, just like every game on this list. So my number 5, excuse me, My Father's Work. Let's go now to number 4. My number 4 is a game that actually the length sometimes makes me unwilling to play it because it's a great game. It's just a great time. This game is called Forgotten Waters. And much like My Father's Work, it is based around an app that you're going to use to kind of get the experience. You'll see it's listed at 120 to 240 minutes, and that's about right. It also says you can put it away at the halfway point, but you're not going to want to. The story is so compelling. It's sort of this pirate adventure, and there's several different versions you can go on, and it's you're going to make these choices, and it's going to impact the story. It has good humor. It has great voice acting. It is just a fun experience. It says 3 to 7 players, although there are rules to play it solo as well, if that's what you want to do, or with 2. You can even play this one remotely. This one came out in 2020, and they quickly put out a remote sort of system that you could play it with friends in other places. But the story here is really what you're coming for. The gameplay is fun, right? It's there's some bit of worker placement. There's some checks and stuff, but what you're really coming here for is to see where these stories take you. And it's a long story. It's like watching a really long movie. But it's a good story and a great game and a lot of fun. Forgotten Waters. I have not tried the new one. I can't even remember its name. Freelancers, excuse me. But I'm hoping to do so soon. Let's move on now to my number 3. So the last 2 games were very story heavy. Um, did I skip a number? I might have done. Huh. Well, I'm going to tell you very quickly that my number 6 was supposed to be Voidfall. I apparently skipped it, but I talked about it a lot last week. So there you go. We're supposed to be. I'm looking at my list here. I'm thinking, what happened? Anyway, my last couple of games were very heavy on story. This game, my number 3, Through the Ages, is very much not. This is a game about civilization. It's one of the best civilization games out there. It is 120 minutes. It might be longer if you play. That's probably with 2 players who know what they're doing. If you play with more people, it'll be even longer than that. This is a game about civilization. You're going to take your civilization from the early prehistoric days until modern times. There's conflict, there's technology, there's development, there's progress, there's economy. Everything is in this game. And yet it's all cards. There's not really, a map where you're going to expand and move out on. It's all this card selection mechanism, and then sort of the way that things upgrade in this very somewhat complicated board that really helps you keep everything together as you develop and build your economy. This is just such a fantastic game. I know it doesn't look like much from these pictures, but the game itself is really so very interesting. You can kind of see it set up here. Anyway, this is a game that I really love. I've played it so many times. I don't think I would ever play it with 4 players again. But as a two-player game, this can be, I mean, this really just gets to you. It is a long game, though. Be aware of that going in. It is my number 3. There you go, Through the Ages. Let's go on to my number 2. I didn't do this intentionally, but my number 2 actually starts with the word two. Specifically, my number 2 is Too Many Bones. Too Many Bones is uh, an adventure game and a skirmish battling game, basically. You'll see it says 60 to 120 minutes. It can really depend. You can pick a long session or a short session, depending on what you have time for. I will say the long ones allow you to develop your character more, though, and that's where really all the fun is. If you play one that's too short, you just don't get the full experience. In this game, you have hundreds of custom dice. And you are this character, and you're going to use these dice, and you have a complicated upgrade tree that you cannot see here because for whatever reason, oh, you can see this one. And so you use this neoprene mat to store your dice, and you're going to go through these skirmishes, all using chips. All the figures are chips, and you're moving around tactically. You're trying to avoid enemies and also do them damage. There's a bunch of special abilities, lots of dice rolling, random lucky game, but also you've got surprising amount of control as you use these different abilities to your advantage. There's a lot here. There's 3 sort of core sets, each with its own, different characters and different villains to fight. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of game, and it's a lot of time, but it is a fantastic game if you have the mental capacity for a lot of rules. Some people would refer to it as too many rules, and also a lot of time to play it, and a lot of money because it's pretty expensive. Anyway, that's my number 2, Too Many Bones. And here we are at my number 1. My number 1 I have already mentioned in passing. Oddly enough, the last game on my list and the first game on my list are kind of related by some similar mechanisms. My number 1 long game is Twilight Struggle. Twilight Struggle is, it says 120 to 180 minutes, and that's a good guess. It's a good range, but it is a tense, tight, thrilling 2 to 3 hours. It is. I mean, I've talked about it on my theme first game list. The history just jumps out at you, and the gameplay is so tight. It's a war game, but everything's so subtle. And it's not about sort of going in guns a-blazing. It's about spreading your influence in the long run, and about planning things and mitigation. And there's just so much to love here. I mean, this is one of my favorite games of all time. And it is a very long game. 2 players only, so just be aware of that. But it is a good game for 2 players, especially 2 players who know what they're doing, because this is a game that very much favors repeat plays. You're going to get better as you learn what's coming and learn how to plan for things. But it is a fascinating, thrilling 2 to 3 hours. A game that goes the distance on Twilight Struggle is a nail biter the whole time. And if you win, it can be exhilarating. And if you lose, it can be exhilarating as well, because it's going to be usually by just a few turns. Somebody slightly outplayed you. Just a fantastic game, but very long. Anyway, that is my list of, I talked about 10 games. Sorry, I forgot the number 6, which was Voidfall. But again, go check the Wednesday Whimsy from last week to hear my thoughts about that one. It is a good game, but it is very long, and it's fun. Anyway, I don't want to make this video too long because no one wants a super long video. So I'm going to wrap it up here. Next week will be, I believe, my 100th episode. And so I'll be talking about my favorite game of all time, Summoner Wars. So come back and check that one out. But until then, I'm going to wish you safe travels, courage when you need it, and I hope to see you back here next Wednesday for another episode of Wednesday Whimsy. Bye-bye.